Welcome back to the Jungle Fever podcast. I'm Ethan Sargent. Aiden Crowley is here with me. And as I always like to say, I said it last year, I'll say it again. The Bengals got better this past week. They
Did
made,
you say it last year?
I think they made some decent picks last year. I will say, we'll start right off the jump. I think this year's draft on paper is already better than last year's draft. Now, we can't. And my big thing with evaluating drafts is I think you got to wait at least 3 years to truly like. I don't understand this obsession with like the national media and I guess the general public has with giving drafts a grade like in the millisecond after they happen. I don't think it like none of those grades are ever going to be the true grade. You have to wait. Like you could grade the 22 and past drafts by now, but I think you got to wait a little bit. But in any case, the Bengals made some big time moves. They traded on day three. They signed bunch of players. We're going to go through everything. We're going to go through all the draft. We're going to go through all the undrafted free agents. There was a press conference earlier today. We're recording this on the Monday post draft. There's a press conference today. Duke Tobin, some interesting faces, made some interesting appearances, and I want to talk about that a little bit as well. Some new voices kind of coming to the forefront in the Bengals front office. Um, but let's start off with the Bengals' first round pick. Pick number 10, they select Dexter Lawrence out of Clemson. I'll take it.
It's the best pick in round one.
I will take it. A multi-time All-Pro, multi-time Pro Bowler. He's going to come in and instantly be a force on this Bengals defensive front. On that note, we're going to talk a lot of Bengals today, but all three of the other teams in the AFC North, the Browns did have multiple picks in the first round, but all three of them drafted an offensive lineman with their first selection in the 2026 NFL draft. The Browns selected Spencer Fano after they traded down from 6 to 9. They drafted Spencer Fano out of Utah. I like that pick a lot. Another pick I liked a lot was, I'm going to butcher this name, but Olavega Ione. You know, I think I got it well enough.
That's pretty good.
Guard out of Penn State. Baltimore had needed major help on the offensive line. They get it there in the form of the Penn State guard.
That's a great pick.
And
That's a
the
great pick.
Steelers had quite an interesting few minutes. Obviously, home draft looks like a receiver, Makai Lemon, might fall right into their lap at 21. Instead, Philadelphia jumps him as Makai Lemon is on the phone with Omar Khan. And Philadelphia jumps up, takes Makai Lemon with the 20th overall pick. So the Steelers are forced to settle for a guy that I think has some of the highest potential in this draft in Max Ihenachor out of Arizona State. Only started playing football about 4 years ago, did not play football in high school. So it could be an interesting story there, but definitely a little bit more of a developmental project pick there for Pittsburgh rather than a guy that's going to come in and instantly be a sure thing along that line. But enough about those guys. Let's talk about the Bengals. Let's talk about pick number 40, 42, 41 in this draft, and that is Cassius Howell out of Texas A&M. Seen a lot of national love for this pick. I've seen a lot of media outlets have a lot of big plaudits and respect for it. I know it was kind of a weird reaction for me, and I think from you as well, Aiden, where at first it was kind of like, like, is that what they need? And then when you kind of zoom back out and you kind of realize the purpose of drafting him, I've come around on this pick a whole lot. Aiden, I'm going to let you kind of give your perspective here as well. And you can talk about really whatever. You could go in. We're going to talk a little bit about Cassius Howell, the player, but you can talk about the perspective as well in terms of where the Bengals were looking to fill needs. And obviously, you can now contextualize that with the rest of what they did throughout the rest of day two with Sicario Davis, who we'll touch on in a second, and then the rest of day three.
That's the word. I like that word, contextualize. Because when the first initial pick happened, um, I, I had some resentment, not gonna lie, just because I felt like there were bigger needs than edge four. However, when you contextualize this pick with the rest of their draft, this is a different Bengals front office. I need to
Hmm.
know. I need to know what happened in the last 2 months because the, this whole draft, when you look at it, is completely different from previous drafts in their
Yep.
previous MO. And they show their cards with pick one. Cassius Howell is someone who does not fit the Bengals profile at all. You think
Nope.
about the edges that recently have been selected by the Cincinnati Bengals. The two ones that come to mind, obviously, are the two that have been drafted in the first round, and Miles Murphy and Shamar Stewart. Just these two mutants, as they describe them, these huge athletes, these powerful guys. Cassius Howell is the exact opposite. He's that twitchy, quick edge that's undersized and kind of almost can drop back in coverage and be an off-ball linebacker for you a little bit as well. He's a perfect complement to that edge room. And he's somebody who has a ton of upside. The question is, can he play at his size? And that's the biggest question.
Yeah.
That's why he fell in the second round. An extremely productive player at Texas A&M. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. He had 11 and a half sacks this season for A&M. So overall, as we've learned more about what the Bengals' philosophy was for this draft and where they were looking to attack, and then you contextualize it with the team as a whole. This was my favorite pick from the Bengals in this draft. And you think about the impact that he can have. He's going to come down on third and long and obvious pass situations in relief for some guys will play first and second down. He profiles right now as kind of that third down only obvious pass situation, just because you are concerned about his ability to stuff the run and be a run defender, and teams kind of exposing that. So I don't think the Bengals will be interested in having him on the field in those situations. But if you need a guy to win quick, this is who that is, and he's completely different mold than anybody they have in the building. I
It's
love it.
so interesting because obviously this is now back-to-back years of drafting an edge rusher out of Texas A&M. And the whole thing about Shamar Stewart was traits over production, right? The traits are elite, some of the best we've ever seen in that position coming out of college. However, the production, he only had 3.5 sacks in his collegiate career, was not there. Now, Shamar Stewart is far from a finished product. He has plenty of time to, and as we've seen with Miles Murphy, it takes some time to kind of get your feet underneath you as an NFL edge rusher. But my point here is Cassius Howell is a straight flip. This is production over traits. Ayden, how many times have you and I banged this drum for the Bengals to pick a guy like this? And it doesn't like you can say it anywhere. Like you draft a corner who has a ton of picks, it's probably going to work out pretty well, and you draft a receiver who's got back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons, it's probably going to work out pretty well, right? This is a player who moved up from the Mid-American Conference, was at Bowling Green, came up to Texas A&M, and instantly leveled up against SEC competition, right? Like Ayden said, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, 11 and a half sacks. This is somebody who, like Ayden said, I agree totally. I think this is a perfect kind of third down curveball. And an interesting tidbit that I noticed from the press conference that Al Golden had when they did their post-pick press conference here is he said this quote directly, pass rushing in waves. Which two
Mhm.
teams in the last two seasons have done that to note? Yes, the last two Super Bowl champions in the Philadelphia Eagles in 2024 and the Seattle Seahawks in 2025. Both of those teams, it wasn't just one player who was really good. They had a ton of different players that they could come in, phase in. The Bengals have about 7 or 8 different guys now that they can mold in this edge rushing room. And I think Al Golden and Jerry Montgomery, the defensive line coach, have license to get insanely creative here with some of the fronts that they can throw at teams. And that is an unbelievable luxury, right? The Bengals all of a sudden have one of the better defensive lines in the AFC.
That's what I was just about to say. So Duke Tobin, before this offseason, he hammers the fact that his commitment will be in the trenches. And sometimes when Duke speaks, it's kind of just like, okay. And then he doesn't go out
I'm
there and
I'm
does.
I'm gonna not talk shit
He
about Duke. Oh, not talk about Duke Tobin anymore. That's fine.
he he went out there and did it. I mean, this line is absolutely transformed. It is night and day different from where it was 2 months ago. And Cassius Howe is a guy who is gonna get reps. And you think about the development that Miles Murphy showed, and obviously you mentioned Boye Mafe, a guy coming from Seattle. He doesn't have the numbers. That's because he played in a system kind of similar to this, and it's one. And this is the new age for the NFL is the ability to be multiple, the ability to throw fresh bodies just time and time and time again and wear out those lines. And it's
Here's a
won a lot.
I've got a hot take here. And this, I know we're going to do bold predictions in like July or August, but like, here's a hot take. The Bengals as a team are in the top 8 in sacks, but not a single Bengals player is in the top 10 in sacks. There's a take because I think you spread those numbers out across 7 or 8 different bodies. You're not going to have a Trey Hendrickson who had 17 and a half sacks 2 years ago, right? You don't need it. Like, what's the quote from Moneyball? you recreate it in the aggregate, except it actually could work for the Bengals. It kind of worked for the A's, but it really feels like it's going to work for the Bengals here because you have so many options, and it really is. I think again, I'm thinking like an AA plus on this pick. I just mentioned how I don't love grading picks, right off the jump, but this feels like one of those swings that the Bengals take that feels like it's going to pay off. So, Cassius Howell,
Yeah.
excited to have him
And
in
then you
Cincinnati.
contextualize it. We'll probably get into it a little bit later in our discussion, but you contextualize it with the rest of the defense as well, specifically linebacker, which I'm sure we'll touch on once we get through all these picks. But the when you improve the line like this, it helps everybody else in the back end. It takes so much stress off of the linebackers, off of the secondary, off of the safeties, because their ability to go in and wreak havoc instantly. That's why Dexter Lawrence is so important to this team. But we'll go into that probably more in
Absolutely.
depth
Yeah,
later.
that D line is ferocious. Let me tell you that much. And it figures to be a real strength for this team when it's been a weakness at times over these last few years when you take out one specific player, who's now, of course, playing for a rival team. Let's go to corner in round three. Takario Bobo Davis. Bobo's the nickname. I feel like Taco kind of works pretty well too, but if he wants to be called Bobo, he can be called Bobo.
Zach Taylor called him Bobo first introduction when he first landed in
Yeah, and
Cincinnati. He went straight to
the
Bobo.
thing about Takario Davis, this might be the most interesting pick the Bengals made. I'm not going to call it the best or the worst. I don't think it's either of those, but I think it might be the most interesting pick the Bengals made because this truly feels like a player. Takario Davis, if he came out in the 2025 draft after his sophomore season at Arizona, he's probably a first round pick. He is probably somebody who goes in the 20s range. Super physical, 6'4", 100 or actually listed at 6'5", 195 pounds. You don't see corners that are built that big in the modern NFL. He is a big, big, big body. Now, the reason why he was picked in the third round and not a whole lot earlier than that is because the season that he just had at Washington, following Jed Fish from Arizona to Washington, it was not, I think, what he would have hoped for it to be. I do think that there was some injury issues at Washington, and there were some lapses in judgment, more in coverage. One positive on the lapses in judgment part, not in missed tackles. Zero, zero missed tackles in his career. I think that's extremely impressive. And you think about that being a huge issue for the Bengals last year. Having a guy that doesn't miss tackles is going to be very helpful. The player that came to mind, and this is again, I'm going to go back to the press conference where Mike Radzovich, we're going to talk a lot about later, and mentioned, and who's the other guy? David Potts mentioned this specifically as well. They envisioned Takario Davis playing a Trey Flowers-like role. Now, if you mention Trey Flowers around the Seattle Seahawks, you might get punched. But if you mention Trey Flowers around a Cincinnati Bengals fan, they remember him pretty fondly because if you remember back to those Super Bowl teams or the AFC Championship teams, Trey Flowers kind of became known as the Kelsey stopper because on those obvious third and longs and those second downs, Kelsey would come in and play that kind of nickel and dime back, and his job was to shadow Travis Kelsey or any strong tight end, right? And the reason why I think it worked so well is because Trey Flowers was also a big and long cornerback at about 6'4", and I think that's exactly what they envision here. Now, could there be a future for Takario Davis on the outside? Absolutely, right? I think that all kind of depends on how he develops over his first couple of years in the league, but I think there's a role for him day one, week one in that position, coming in on some of those nickel and dime packs. Ayden, what do you kind of think about where the Bengals went with this third round pick?
This third round pick was the moment where I was like, okay, like we're doing it. But this is if there was one, if you asked me to have one word to describe this draft, it would be upside. This is the upside play. You can't teach 6'4", 195. You just can't. His length and his wingspan is insane as well. He has some qualities that I guess I could best describe as Eli Apple moments at Washington, where he just kind of gets burnt sometimes, and that was why he fell to the third round. It was the inconsistency and the concerns about his ability to be that alpha in man coverage, right? But when he comes in, he doesn't necessarily have to be day one for the Bengals because you have Dax and you have DJ. Like you mentioned, I see him playing a Trey Flowers role. I see him kind of in that mold of coming in and being that long rangy guy. You mentioned Seattle. This pick is almost one for one, in my opinion, of Reek Woolen for Seattle and what he was able to do. Another third round guy, another huge corner, a lot of concerns about can he do it consistently. That's worked out pretty well for Seattle. I find it interesting in that same conversation with Potts. He mentioned that he views Decario Davis as a outside starting corner in the NFL. Take that. I think everybody, Bengals fans, kind of knows what that means. It's if DeCario has a good year and is plays at the level that they think that he can, that means probably one of DJ or Dax is walking. Because he's not a guy who's going to play slot. He's too big. He's going to get exposed by NFL offenses and what they're able to do with their slot receivers and the ability to move around, whatever. But I very much enjoy the pick. I think that again, this is an upside play. If he works out, that's great. And if he doesn't, you're not hurting too bad. But CB3 was a concern. I'm surprised they didn't go slot only. But again, it's just this is a different Bengals draft where they weren't necessarily pigeonholing themselves into need. They were taking guys that fell on their board that they felt were best, and I'm happy with the pick as well.
And that's what, like, in that press conference for Cassius Howell, they mentioned they, as in the draft committee of Potts and Radkovich and I think Tobin and a couple of those people. They all mentioned that Howell was right at the top of their board, and he happened to fall to them. And you know, I'd rather hear that, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with that notion. I'd rather hear that than for them to say, "Oh, well, we were zeroing in on a position." Right? Or we really felt like we needed to improve at X spot. So I agreed with you on both. I'm a fan of both of these picks. There aren't a lot of picks I'm not a fan of in this draft. I think this next pick might be my favorite of the draft. We'll get to that in a second. But I think when you look at it as a whole, we could do a quick aside here because I think this is a good kind of point to do it. Trey Brown is formerly of the Eagles front office. This felt like an Eagles draft, right? This felt like a draft that they would make, right? Where they kind of load up on positions they know that they're good in already, and they take best players. I think back to 2023, right? A couple years before they would end up winning a Super Bowl, right? They took Nolan Smith out of Georgia, a couple picks after the Bengals took Miles Murphy, right? And Nolan Smith was crucial in them winning a Super Bowl, right? All of those things I think line up, and you think about the way Seattle's drafted over the last couple of years. A lot of those same trends we just talked about. Reek Woolen, right, who is a guy who had some first round upside, fell a little bit because of some of I think that is a very good comparison. They're not quite the same, but very similar, Davis and Woolen. And I think that you look at the models and look at who's won the last two Super Bowls, and it's not too crazy to figure out how these teams are winning, right? And now moving over to day number three, where champions are made. I hammered this point home last year about how you look at the way Kansas City has drafted on this day over the last couple of years and how many contributors they've gotten. And it's the same for Seattle. It's the same for Philly. It's the same for all the contenders, too. It's not even just the teams that end up winning. It's the teams that are there. So the Bengals, I think, started the day off with one of the best picks of the entire day, regardless of team.
Well, they started with a trade.
Yes, they traded down from, I believe, pick 110 to about pick 124, and they ended up
Down 18
moving.
spots. Yeah.
Yeah, they moved down about 18 spots, but then they swapped up about 50 something spots, actually getting the last pick of the fourth round from the New York Jets, who actually ended up taking Cade Klubnik with that original fourth round pick. But the Bengals go get another player out of the SEC in a center by the name of Connor Lew, and this pick is really good, Ayden, because of a couple of reasons. Number one, the Bengals had an obvious need at center, right? Matt Lee was let go earlier last week. Ted Karras is 33 years old and on the last year of his contract. It's a position the Bengals now have a lot of depth in. You figured a pick like this was coming. Now, another player here that very easily could have been a first or second round pick if it weren't for some limiting factors. The limiting factor here for Connor Lew, he's coming off an ACL tear in October of last year for the Auburn Tigers. So again, when you look at his tape, I mean, he's a mauler. And you look at what he was able to do in an Auburn team that, again, they had a lot of chaos going on at Auburn last year, a lot of weird things happening. And the one constant was number 64 in the middle of that line, right? He was just a steady rock for an Auburn offensive line that really wasn't the reason why Auburn struggled. But Connor Lew is a really, really good football player that I think, again, without the ACL, probably goes in the second round. The Bengals get a steal in the fourth.
Yeah, I first of all, I really enjoy the trade because you're sitting there on draft day and you're like, the Bengals still have all these boxes that they have to check. There's just no way that they don't go through this draft without a trade down. They need more picks, and they still didn't check every box. I think it was kind of impossible for them to. But like you mentioned, this was one that was needed. Backup center. You think about Ted Karras is getting old, and you bring a guy in who's 20 years old, who you feel like can come in and contribute pretty well. Was an All-American his freshman year, and then obviously the ACL tear happened. One thing that stood out in the draft process that coaches were talking about was just his intelligence. The Bengals do put a lot of pressure and a lot of emphasis on that center position, the ability to make checks and stuff. So you need somebody who's a little bit cerebral, and it sounds like Connor Lew fits that mold. He also thrives in pass pro. That's where the Bengals like to be as well. So you think he says that he should be good by camp. You hope that he is, but there isn't necessarily this big pressure to get him
Exactly.
ready. Um, and so he can ramp up to the speed that he needs to, and then obviously back up Ted Karras. And then
And
whenever
he's
Ted
learning
decides to
from
hang
one of
out,
the best. He's
right,
learning from a guy who's been there, who's won multiple Super Bowl
right,
championships, who has been in this league for a decade plus. Not many better voices, I think, to learn from than Ted Karras. So
yeah.
I think the Bengals, I mean, I think if we're talking next year, I feel like Connor Lew might be your starting center, penciled in for
I
2026.
think I think Ted's
We'll
got a
see.
year or two.
I hope so,
I think
because
he's
I
got a
love
year or
Ted. I'm a
two.
huge Ted Karras fan. I think what he's done for the city and the community of Cincinnati has been amazing. And I think he's a great football player too. I think that's a pretty good combination. It'll earn you a lot of respect in the Cincinnati area, and what he's done with the Cincy hats and what he's done being a leader of this football team, I think is really, really special, really impressive. And I think Ted will really. I think he'll love it. I feel like that's kind of something that he'll kind of take the reins of, is being able to grab a young player. By the way, only 20 years old, Connor Lew, be able to grab a young player by the scruff of the neck and kind of lead them through the fire of the NFL and, bring them up to where they are. So I don't think Connor Lew could be drafted into a much better situation. And I think that again, Scott Peters is revolutionizing this O line, man. The days of the
He was a
jokes about this.
wrestler. He was a wrestler in high school. You can
Yep.
almost
You
guarantee it.
saw you
If
saw the
Scott Peters
success
likes
that
you, it's because he was a wrestler in high
saw the
school.
success that Fairchild had. Scott Peters has a massive MMA background. Like it's not even a joke. It's a clear emphasis. Like it's a
No, not,
clear thing that
I'm being serious.
Scott Peters is 100% looking for. So Connor Lew comes in. We got another lineman, a whole lineman from back home that we'll talk about a little bit later. A former, I know you're not going to like this, but a Saint X grad that the Bengals drafted in the sixth round. The Bengals did
Wearing
not have a
stripes
fifth
now.
round pick. They ended up moving up into the fourth round, and they end up taking Colby Young, the wide receiver out of Georgia. You want to talk about big bodies? Here's another one. Colby Young, 6'5", 210 pounds, was at Miami, then came over to Georgia. So he's been doing it at the Power Five level. Again, some injury concerns here in terms of some stuff that happened. There's also a couple of off the field issues with him that I'm not going to get super into, as they've been resolved out of court, but still something to monitor, especially when you think about what just happened at the receiver position. Jermaine Burton, by the way, going to Buffalo on a minicamp invite. So good luck to Brandon Beane and company. Um, but Colby Young is what I really see for him as being a true red zone threat, right? Like I think this guy is going to dominate in those sort of situations. Because for a guy who's 6'5", if you watch the film, my God, he is quick. For a guy with that much muscle and that much to him, just in terms of length, he is a fast 6'5". And I think that the Bengals can really make use. You see what they've been able to do with a guy like Andre Yosevas in the red zone, in terms of using Yosevas's length and athleticism to get some favorable one-on-one matchups, whether it's on the outside or in the slot. I could see that for Young as well, potentially kind of usurping Yosevas in that role. That could be a good battle to watch throughout camp. So that's my takeaway on this pick. What are your thoughts?
My initial thought, there's obviously major character concerns. He was
Hmm.
suspended, obviously, for the situation with battery. where it was dropped. However, if you look into it, it's not nothing. So that was one thing, major red flags, and then the injury that came as well. But again, Bengals are rolling the dice. This is an upside pick. Zach Taylor, he was very adamant in the post game, the post draft conference, because there were a lot of questions about Young's character. And he's personally said, I am very confident in what I've heard about this young man. Now, he said that a couple years ago with Jermaine Burton. But with that aside, taking that, and then you want to talk about the on the field stuff, this is something that the Bengals have been searching for ever since that 2022 AFC Championship loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. They need somebody when they want to go double double and they want to bring those safeties down and double Jamar and double T. They need a guy who can win. Now, that position, the Bengals really like somebody who's big and physical and can block in the run game. That's what Yoshi does really, really well. However, Yoshi hasn't been able to beat man coverage. He hasn't been able to kind of expose that group once it does come. Kobe Young, he's not going to, or excuse me, Colby Young, he's not going to beat you with his speed. He's just not. That's the one thing he kind of lacks is that top end, go get it kind of speed. But he's going to beat you with some physicality and he's going to shred you at the line of scrimmage. That's the word that Paul Dehner Jr. used that I really enjoyed. He's not going to burn you off the line. He's going to shred you because he's 6'5", 220. So I enjoy it.
You don't need 4.3 at that. Look, you're not
Right,
getting 4.3 from anybody at that
right,
speed. If you
right,
are, I mean, you might get that from number 4 Ohio State this upcoming year, and that's about it, right? Like
right.
I think when you look at the body of work, yes, it's not like he doesn't have these stats that are like holy smokes, right? He's like raking it in. He transferred, and again, like you said, those character issues are major. And again, I was just reading through some of the quotes that Dan Pitcher and Zach Taylor had about him, and like you said, Zach Taylor is very effusive in how he speaks about his character, right? He talks about how they sat him down. They had a lengthy pre-draft interview with him where they grilled him, as I'm sure a lot of NFL teams did, right? And if this is, it's like Burton again, where Burton,
A
Zach Taylor said
guy,
the same
yeah,
thing, you
exactly.
know?
A guy with this mold, this build, and this skill set does not just happen to drop to the round. There is a
Yeah,
reason. That
yeah.
is the reason. Teams were uncomfortable with it. The Bengals feel like they are, but it's the idea of Jermaine Burton, right? It's
I
the
think that's
it's
what is probably
the
scaring a lot of
upside of
people.
Jermaine Burton,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
So.
that's what the Bengals are rolling the dice on. It's a role that they've been
And
trying
it's
to
a
fill
and
for
and this is the
five,
thing when you think
4
about
years.
draft capital, this is a fourth round pick as opposed to a third round pick. Day three as opposed to day two, there's different money involved. The contracts are a little different on day three as opposed to day two. A little bit less risk. There's not nearly as much guaranteed money in the day three contracts as there are in the day two contracts. You saw that with Jermod McCoy, where he was a potential top 10 pick. He slides all the way to day three because of that knee, and ends up getting taken, I believe, with the third or fourth pick in the fourth round, going out to Las Vegas to go play for the Raiders. Let's move on to a local kid, a Cincy kid, Brian Parker II, out of Duke. I think the one word to describe this guy is versatility. He could play all 5 spots on the offensive line. And I think he's somebody who I think the Bengals drafted for that main purpose. I think they see him as that kind of, when you look at a depth chart, Brian Parker in that second spot. They want to see Brian Parker, Brian Parker, Brian Parker, Brian Parker, Brian Parker. That's what they think. That's what I think they feel like with this pick. And let me tell you, only 4 sacks allowed in almost 3 seasons of college football. Pretty good, if you ask me. Pretty good for a guy drafted in the sixth round, Aiden.
Yeah, the only concern is can he play tackle at the NFL level? His arm length isn't ideal. He even mentioned it himself when talking about it. So that's going to be the biggest question mark. But he profiles really well for a guard or center. Now, can he be a swing tackle? That's the biggest question. They tried it with Jalen Rivers in this spot last year, and it took literally one preseason game for them to realize this guy can't play tackle. So he can maybe be a backup guard, but that's still the position they haven't really addressed. So we'll see in the camp process what that looks like for Brian. But you always got to be happy for a local kid going to Cincinnati. St. X obviously strong ties to the Bengals organization, so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool, right? A kid, he worked out at the Bengals local pro day a couple weeks ago. And the Bengals clearly saw some stuff they liked as opposed to what they saw on film. So excited for that. I think it's a good pick. I love these two swings they took in the seventh round. I think these are both really high upside guys. So obviously Fernando Mendoza didn't start his career at Indiana. He started out at Cal. Who was his top receiver in 2024? Tight end Jack Endries, who is now a Cincinnati Bengal. They take him in the seventh round. Endries ended up transferring to Texas. Did not have nearly the year that I think he or anybody would have expected him to have, but I think a lot of people were looking at that 2024 film and they see a guy who can really contribute. Let me tell you, I don't know if any draft interview got me as hyped as this guy's interview. He was angry. I love it. You
Yeah.
got to have that fire. He was like, I am beeping pissed at all the teams that didn't draft me. So you love that fire. You love that competitiveness. Obviously, I think you can look past what happened last year when you see what happened in Cal. And again, this is a seventh round, right? You're looking for those guys that you see some flashes of some potential in. The Bengals see him as a guy that I think that could come in and potentially be that pass catching tight end. That can also, that's what we kind of talked about the mold that the Bengals are looking for a tight end. They don't really have that true tight end as of now. And the tight end position is truly evolving in the NFL. You see it with Kenyon Sadiq, who went to the Jets at number 16, not anywhere near a prototypical tight end. Even look at Brock Bowers a couple years ago, not a prototypical tight end. These high level tight ends that are getting drafted are so far away from the mold of what an NFL tight end is. The mold itself has completely changed over the last 4 to 5 years. So the Bengals are going to try and find somebody who I think honestly is a little bit more traditional of a tight end. He can do both roles, right? I think he's a little bit better of a pass catcher than he is a blocker. But again, the injuries and what happened to him at Texas kind of got shuffled down the depth chart a little bit. Didn't work out as planned for him. I think you're banking on potential a little bit, which is the seventh round. I think it's okay. You can do that.
I was really surprised that he was still available. This was
Hmm.
somebody on the consensus board that had like a fourth or fifth round grade. So you can kind of understand why you go from thinking that you're going to be a high day three pick to I don't know if I'm going to get drafted. That would piss you off a little bit. And it certainly did for him. It seems like he's ready to come in and work. Charlie Goldschmidt described him as having a little Seth MacLaughlin in him. And you think that pick didn't really work out very well for the Bengals because of the abdomen injury that he suffered. He never really got back to where he needed to. But twitchy, that's kind of the word that is used to describe Endry. He's a good pass catcher as well. So I know we're kind of running a little short on time, but so I'll keep it brief. But I enjoyed it. It's a swing. It's a swing. But one of my favorite picks is the one that everyone knew what was coming, but
We
still
talked
happened the
about
next day
it
later.
all week. You just knew
This is
if
the
he was
most
there.
telegraphed pick, I think, in draft
I've
history.
ever seen. They did every single type of meeting with this guy.
Yeah.
Um, Navy defensive lineman Landon Robinson. I'm glad for his sake he's a Bengal because clearly we were obsessed with him. And let me tell you, you want to talk about physical freak? This guy squats 700 pounds. 700. To play defensive tackle in the NFL, you better be able to be at or around that level. And clearly the strength is not a concern for Landon Robinson. The size is a little bit. But that's probably why he's here in the seventh round as opposed to a little bit higher because he was the American Defensive Player of the Year. The American Conference Defensive Player of the Year last year as a defensive tackle, which is not an easy thing to do. Had, I think, 6.5 sacks from that position. And let me tell you, who better to learn from? We talked about this just a second ago with Karras and Connor Lew. Who better to learn from than Dexter Lawrence, one of the best in the business, because he truly could be that nose tackle. So, you have a chance here to learn from the best in the biz here, and get a chance to sharpen your iron against some of the best in the biz as well.
Yeah, he's going to probably get taken under the wing. He probably profiles a little bit more in that Jonathan Allen role in BJ Hill. It's going to be a interesting camp because it feels like it's going to be Chris Jenkins versus Landon Robinson for that DT3 role. We'll see how it goes. I don't want to make this comparison because I obviously, but they profile very similarly. And he also worked out with him in the pre-draft process. This is a guy that reminds you in his build a little bit of Aaron Donald coming out of
He
Pitt.
could be if he could be a quarter of the player Aaron
Yeah,
Donald was,
exactly,
he'll be
exactly.
a great
I'm
pick.
I'm just saying from a profile perspective, they profile very similarly. What was the knock on Aaron Donald coming out of Pitt? his size. They didn't know if he was able to do that. Same thing, 6 foot,
He did.
287, but he's quick, he's strong, he's able to shed blocks very quickly. He did it a lot at Navy. Now the question is, can he do it at the NFL level? And this is somebody who you want to talk about character concerns with one of the picks previously. You don't got to worry about that with
No
Landon.
character concerns here,
He's
man.
a
He is amazing, dude. His dad is a
he's
Bengals
a
fan.
side
His dad was electric in that video post draft. So
right.
cool to see. Good
If you want to
story.
know, yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
the thing is he's a cyber defense major at Navy. So
Ooh,
yeah,
smart
intelligent
cookie.
as well.
Yeah. Maybe the Bengals could use some. Maybe he can go transition up there and help them out at some point.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Bengals did bring in 9 undrafted free agents. There's a couple I'm going to touch on briefly. Let's go through the list here real quick first, as we are a little short on time. Arkansas offensive lineman Corey Robinson, South Alabama running back Kentrell Bullock, SMU safety Isaiah Nwakobia, I believe I got that right. Nebraska cornerback Sierra Wright, Georgia Tech running back Jamal Haynes, USC linebacker Eric Gentry, San Diego State offensive lineman Christian Jones, Kentucky tight end Josh Caddis, and Cincinnati linebacker Jack Dingle. Dingle felt like an easy one, another hometown kid, somebody who could play. The guy I really want to talk about is Eric Gentry. I think this guy's got a real shot to make the team. Such a unprototypical linebacker, like genuinely one of the strangest builds and height weight lists that you'll ever see at linebacker spot. But he is freakishly tall and he is a playmaker. He just flies to the football, makes a lot of unique plays you're not really used to seeing linebackers make. I love bringing him in. And then Jamal Haynes, you saw what he was able to do in that kind of run first offense at Georgia Tech behind Haynes King and that great Georgia Tech offensive line. It could be interesting to see what kind of body he could make up potentially in that fight for that RB3 spot. Look at it, Taj Brooks, him, a couple other of these camp bodies. They brought in Kentrell Bullock as well. So could be a good battle there for that third running back position throughout camp. Ayden, any thoughts on those guys?
Not particularly. I agree with a lot of what you said. But I will take this last couple minutes to say, notice how we went through all those picks. Not a single linebacker was taken, or it's just I don't know how many times Duke and Zach and Al need to double down or triple down or quadruple down on the fact that they believe in the development of Demetrius Knight and Barrett Carter. They just keep showing. A veteran add Bobby Wagner and Okereke feels inevitable. I think Bobby O is probably the most likely. Just got cut by the Giants. He's just kind of hanging around. That would be my pick. But again, they didn't pigeonhole themselves. They didn't draft for that need, and they're banking on the development of those two. So I know we keep harping on it, but like I
And
don't
I
know how many times they
think
want to keep telling you.
And we could talk. I mean, this is a conversation that I think we're going to have all throughout these next few months as we get into kind of when players report in just a couple weeks, right? Joe, and I mean, there's a lot of people already in the building, but Joe and Jamar, and you saw the picture that Joe posted yesterday of him, Jamar, T, and Mike Gesicki getting a quick throwing session in. And Duke Tobin today mentioned his press conference that Joe's in constant communication. And according to Duke, obviously he's not going to say that Joe doesn't love it, but Joe's thrilled with the moves. Which, if I'm Joe, I'm feeling pretty good right now too. So, again, very unorthodox Bengals draft, very non-Bengals like, but a lot of good things, a lot of things to I think be excited about. And I think that when you look at how this team looks now, as opposed to when you look at it when you looked at it in February, I mean, night and day. I think, you can't check it off just yet. There's still a couple things that need to
Right.
happen. There's still a few things that are yet to be done, but it's a very,
We called
very,
it
I think so far, pretty good.
for the last couple months. We called it the most consequential offseason probably in Bengals history. It
They
felt like,
swung. They swung.
and
That's for sure. They
it
didn't
felt
they
like
didn't
they
leave the
treated it
bat on
like
the
it.
shoulder. They swung,
Nope,
and now we'll
they're gonna go
see
down
we'll see
swinging.
where the ball goes, right? So
Yeah,
that'll do it. Next week, episode 50. We've made it to a
fun.
half century for next week. We'll have some fun stuff coming for next week's half century episode. But until then, we'll see you later on the Jungle Fever podcast.